Assalamu alaikum. I'm Samra, Shahzadi Samra for the course of African Literature for Masters. And the course code is ENGL 4117. Today we are going to discuss about the work of Ben Okri, the Famished Road. Famished Road, we are going from now onwards. The work we are going to discuss is the Famished Road, where you are supposed to read the text. I'll also attach text. So, move on to the author of the Famished Road. So he is also an African author, Ben Okri, Nigerian novelist, poet, and essayist. So he was born in March in 1959 in Minna, Nigeria. The previous author like Awolso Enka and Chinua Achebe, were also Nigerian. So he is also Nigerian, and he is still alive. So he began writing. One thing I want to tell you that he also belonged to the Yoruban culture. So he began writing in 1976. Throughout his childhood, he read the books from his father's library, and that was the reason that he became acquainted with literature, ranging from the treatises of Greek philosophers such as Plato and Aristotle to the English classics. So from an early age he also enjoyed African and European folk tales. So later he discovered 20th century African fiction. So in 1976 he began writing, and he was granted a place in science at Nigerian university, and simultaneously he was working as a clerk in a paint company. So he published his first essays and stories in the local press, and upon learning that his university application has been unsuccessful, he moved to London in 1978, and there he worked as a staff writer for a magazine the name of the magazine is Afroscope. So his first novel written when he was still in Nigeria, and it was published by Longman in 1980. So the first novel name was The Flowers and Shadows. So it was also it centers around the disillusionment with the corruption in post-colonial Nigerian society. So the same year he obtained a scholarship from the in 1980 from the Nigerian government to study the comparative literature at the University of Essex. So he went there, and I will then he published many novels. In 1981 he published his second novel, and so it was the style of his writing was like he interweaved the real and the fantastic. There was a fantasy and there was realism. So he often liked the South American magical realism, and he was inspired by the folk tales of Yoruba culture, especially written by an author. Amos Chitola is the name of the Yoruba writer or another Nigerian writer, and he was inspired from that writer as well. And he just intermingled or interweaved magical realism and fantasy, and like this is also seen in his work The Famished Road, that we are going to discuss in our coming lectures. So when in 1982, when the Nigerian government terminated his financial support, so he moved back to London, and after a period of homelessness, he became poetry editor of the journal West Africa from 1983 to 1986, and he also worked as a freelancer, like a freelancer broadcast for the BBC African service, and it was also for 2 years, like 1983 to 1985. So in 1984, he was awarded an Arts Council Bursary Award, and he in 1986 he published his first collection of short stories. The name of the collection is The Incidents at the Shrine. So one thing you'll notice in his biography, that he has won many awards. And in 1987, this work was The Incidents at the Shrine. It was awarded the Commonwealth Writers Prize for the best book, of the African region. And one of the short stories it contained is The Dream Wanders August. So that short story received the Paris Review Aga Khan Prize for fiction. So at the time, he also became the fellow of the Royal Society for Literature. So I have already told you that he is in the Famished Road. He pursued Yoruban culture and magical realism, and it was the Famished Road. It was written in 1991. So as I was telling, that the Incidents at the Shrine and the Stars of the New Curfew, these works, it earned the new fame for Okri. He depicted the poverty, corruption and ethnic conflicts that riddle Nigerian society. So these works mainly distinguish themselves from his previous fiction, by the introduction of magical realism or magical elements into the narratives of the realist settings. So the book The Famished Road, it is about follows the wanderings of an Abiku child. So this work earned him a prestigious Booker Prize, and after 2 years, after 2 weeks of this prize, he had been appointed fellow commoner in creative arts at Trinity College, Cambridge. So for 2 years. So later he wrote 2 sequels of The Famished Road, entitled as The Songs of Enchantment and in 1993, and Infinite Riches in 1998. And he also demonstrated his versatility by publishing 2 volumes of poetry, An African Elegy in 1992 and Mental Fight in 1999, and an allegorical novel, Astonishing the Gods. So as well as he also wrote the collection of essays. So in the decade following the publication of his Booker Prize winning novel, Okri was conferred numerous titles and honors. So he was given the World Economic Forum's Crystal Award in 1995, and he was also presented with honorary doctorates. As if you watch the news, I'm gonna remind you that like Malala, she has also earned honorary doctorate. So Okri, he also earned honorary doctorates from the two universities, the University of Westminster in 1997 and University of Essex in 2002. He was also awarded an OBE in 2001. OBE is basically the Order of British Empire, and it was introduced by George V in 1917, and it is often given to those people who have contributed much who have made significant contributions in the field of arts, medicine or science or any field, like major fields. So he was awarded an OBE in 2001, and it is considered as the second highest order of in the British Empire. So moving on to he was also elected as the vice president of English Center of International PEN in 1997, and was also appointed to the board of the Royal National Theatre in 1999. So you may see that how much he has earned in all those years. He is still writing many things, and he also introduced his combination of tales of freedom include combination or hybrid form of short story. It is a hybrid form in which included short story and haiku, which forms which becomes like a stokas. He mixed short story and haiku. Haiku is basically the Japanese form of poetry, which only consists of you may say 3 phrases or 3 lines. Short, quite short, and he combined 2 forms and introduced a new term, stokus, stokus, and I didn't mention in the slide. You can jot it down. That's why I spelled it. So this was all about his biography, as he is still alive and making his contribution in the field of literature. So now I would move on to the historical context of the Famished Road. You might be wondering that why do I keep telling the historical context of each work, as they all fall under this almost the same historical context. The reason for telling the historical context of each work is because each work is focusing on particular thing. Like Chinua Achebe, he focused on Igbo culture, and Wolfsonka, he focused on that how tradition, there was a tradition defeated the modernity, and now the Ben Okri, he is focusing on something different, he is representing history as an existential struggle. So that is why historical context is important in each of the work. So now move on to the historical context of the Famished Road. A novel set in Nigeria around 1960 and published in English in 1991. So I have previously also discussed that Nigeria is a large nation in West Africa. So in the history that we will be discussing, or I'll be telling the events in the history at the time the novel takes place, from colony to nation. First one is, so forgot to mention the heading, that is from colony to nation. So as Nigeria is a large nation in West Africa, it is extended from the Atlantic Bay of Benin northeastward into the savanna grasslands. So that border the Sahara Desert. So its territory contains the homelands of 200 culturally and linguistically distinct peoples. So whose only unity comes from being included within the arbitrary boundaries drawn by the British government or Great Britain. So in the late 19th century. So of 2000 peoples, I have written peoples because there was variety of people. So the people, there were different communities, they belong to distinct communities, their language was different, their culture, there was difference between cultures. So I have mentioned the peoples instead of people. So like of the 200 peoples, the Yoruba predominate in the west, the Igbo in the east, and the third, the Hausa Fulani in the north. So what the British did, they divided it into different regions in order to rule uniformly, but it was not rule uniform. The indirect rule was not uniform. So they instituted different administrators in the west, in the east in north. So because of which, because of the not uniform government, in 1940 there was a great sense of, or you may say the desire for independence in the African people, and it also the couple the need England's need to scale back on the colonial expenditure, because it was after the World War II, and there was quite a lot, and it became difficult for British for the British people to manage that rule. So that is how it led to the beginnings of the Nigerian self-rule in 1940. So gradually under the the Richard's Constitution in 1946, Nigerians, they began to participate in the government of Nigeria. So at first only in an advisory role. So there were other constitutions, and there were elections, there were some representatives, those were elected, and they were given power. So because of this, it was not the quite the organized form of ruling, but they elected different the constitution that the English people made, the Macpherson Constitution in 1951. What he did, he elected different representatives of and he gave them legislative power. So this created problems in the country because of the wide area of the Nigeria, as it was too huge. So the regions developed at different paces. With the west and east, they attained self government in 1957 and north in 1959. So this led to the full independence in 1960. Which left Nigeria with the problem of how to ensure a stable representative, central government. So the Famished road, it is set during the slow, painful emergence of Nigeria from British colonialism and the uncertain aftermath of Nigerian independence. So it was set during that time period. So now comes the Yoruban tradition and belief, as he has represented Yoruban culture like Soenka, but both are presented it differently. So the Yoruban people, they are composed of many culturally and linguistically related subgroups that are scattered over a wide area in southwestern Nigeria and neighboring nation of Benin. So they are traditionally an urban people. So before colonialism, they lived in towns and cities surrounded by farmlands and separated by the expanses of the forested wilderness. So traditionally, you may say that each town or city, it was ruled by the head male leader. As we looked into the the Baroka in the Lion and the Jewel as a male leader, the Bale, and but here he also introduced another term, that is the Oba, OBA, for used for the leader, male leader. So it was who operated in a hierarchy that was headed by the supreme Oba of the Ife village, the city from which all the Yoruban believe themselves to have originated. So the traditional Yoruba town, it was walled, and at its center set the place of the Oba. Also near the center was the marketplace, generally a large marketplace. So there were roads that were extended from the center. You may imagine as if you have ever visited Faisalabad, you can imagine the clock tower, and you can imagine the clock tower as the Oba, the center place of the leader, and everything emerges from there. Like there are different cities that that emerges from the clock tower. So you can imagine that scenery, that how it was this Oba was the center. So central to the traditional Yoruba belief is the relationship between earth and heaven. So I and Oran. I is the word for earth and Oran is the word for heaven. As earth, it is dominated by the human beings, and Oran is dominated by the Yoruban gods. If you have ever watched any movie regarding the Greek mythologies, you may have seen that how there were gods, they lived in heaven, and they represented of the sphere places where they held all the setup where the Greek gods resided in. So that is the same with the in the Yoruban culture, that I is the domain for human beings and Oran for the Yoruban gods and ancestors. So ancestors means the spirits of the dead Yorubans. So they are thought of as continuous domains, and the relationship is symbiotic. The gods and ancestors have a profound effect on living Yoruba. so who seek to gain the favor of Oran's inhabitants through frequent sacrifices. So the human beings, they travel between the spheres of I and Oran via incarnation, and the seeming contradiction between the beliefs that ancestors reside in Oran and that they reincarnate is reconciled in the concept of the soul. So according to Yoruba belief that each individual has in addition to the physical body, two spiritual components, means two souls, an Ori and an Ami. So Ami is basically the individual's personality in particular incarnation, means in particular form, in particular body, while Ori is the ultimate destiny of the soul and it transcends particular incarnation. It can be in any form. So it is the belief of the Yoruban people. We are discussing these beliefs, this idea, because it is represented in the Famished road. So in order to understand the story, it is important for you to understand these beliefs. So Abiku, as there are the two spiritual components, the Ori and the Ame, so it is said that it was their belief that they preferred to live in the eye, the earth, instead of living in the Oran, means the heaven. So eye is also thought to contain certain spirits who do not wish to be reincarnated at all, and they resist life by willing themselves to die in infancy. So those spirits, they are known as Abiku, and which means born to die. So beliefs about the Abiku child, they exist among other Nigerian ethnic groups as well. The Igbo, for example, they call such Ogobanje, in things fall apart, and there are other the Yoruba believe that a particular Abiku will be born again and again to the same mother. So when a woman gives birth to a series of children who die in infancy, the parent suspects that all of them have been the same Abiku child. And to encourage a newborn to choose life, parents give the child names such as Aidun, means life is good, and Durosnimni means stay, and Bury me, such names which can convince those children to stay instead of willingly die. So the narrator of the Famished road is an Abiku child, and who forsakes his Abiku companions in the Oran, and he chose to stay and experience life in the eye on earth instead of going back to the Oran. So one of the methods the Yoruba may invoke to try to keep an Abiku child in eye is Ogun. Ogun is a method that is used for you may say a concept that falls somewhere between medicine and magic. Medicines means it refers to the remedies like poison, love potions, truth serums, charms, talismans, something like that. So organ is a physical substance that can be composed of plant, animal, or mineral material, and sometimes must be combined with the recitation of a spell. Like the thing we call a taviz or talism or charm. So anyone may use organ, and most Yoruban have knowledge of at least a few organ. So although some individuals have great expertise than other, organ experts may sell their services as do the herbalist in the Famished road. Madame Kuto, she uses organ for their own purposes. And for example, our Hakim, we call also, in other words we call them Hakim. So whatever the Hakim does, that is that concept, that process, that all the process that falls in the concept of organ. I guess you got it now better. So now move on to the ethnic identity and nationalism. So what is the concept of nation for Nigerian people, basically, and or for Nigerian people, and what is the concept of identity for them? So when it came into existence, Nigeria, into the self rule, its various people, they had little idea of statehood. So among most groups, power was very localized, with the village or clan serving as the main focus of the individual loyalty. So you may say the clan or the village was conceived in more moral terms, as long as one abided by the norms and traditions of the community, and community did one belong to that community. So if you abide by the rules or the traditions, you will be considered as the part of that community. So loyalty to the community was regarded as the paramount virtue. It was the most important. They were not familiar with the concept of nationalism. They were familiar with the concept of loyalty. So loyalty is the thing that ultimately it turned them into the good nation. So those who are outside of the one society, they were viewed as with distrust, and any dealings beyond the village or clan, they were considered risky. So worldly success, it depended on having successful relatives or members of one's community who would come to one's aid. So it was they were loyal to their groups, they were loyal to their clan or village or ethnic group, then instead of having the feelings of nationalism. So Nigeria's first attempts at a national government are said to have founded because of the personal self-interest and ethnic loyalties. So the members of one ethnic group felt like a little connection with the members of the other ethnic groups. So each group sought to forward its own cause with a little regard for the nation as a whole. So what they were doing, basically, everyone was presenting the thing that would benefit his own clan or his own ethnic group. They were only thinking of their own clan individually, instead of taking it as a whole, instead of taking it as a nation. So this thing also caused problems. So next comes the party politics. As I previously mentioned, there was the first constitution, that was in 1946 by the Richards Constitution. It divided Nigeria into 3 regions. So the Hausa, Fulani, Yoruba and Igbo. So it divided into 3 regions, and because the regions, they had been drawn along these ethnic lines, the many groups who were not among the predominant 3, who comprise almost half the Nigerian population, it was they were considered as the powerless. So it added to the imbalance of power. And then as matter of fact, the north was larger in territory and population than the other two regions. So for this reason it was sometimes conceived of as having two divisions, north and south. So south being composed of east and west. So all this division, imbalanced division of power, it created problems. So political parties were formed. Means political parties that we have in our country, those were formed in 1920, but they were given or they were acknowledged in 1950 only. Means after 30 years, those parties were taken serious, and they were gained importance, and they were given importance, they gained importance, and they were considered as the legislative power. So it was, as I also mentioned the names of those political parties when I talked about the Lionel Jews. I am going to remind that the National Council of Nigeria and Cameroon's NCNC, and there was an action group AG. There was one more, the Northern People's Congress NPC. So these three were the parties among which it was the Nigeria was divided. They had their different slogans, and the most prominent or the most active one was the AG, and it was they presented Yoruban interest. So in order to in order to attract the non-Yoruban voters, the action group, they modified its image to a progressive liberal ideology with slogans such as life more abundant and freedom for all. So they tried to attract people with their slogans. So there were slogans of different all three parties. NPC, like National Congress, it was run by the Hausa Fulani Muslims. So unlike the situation in the Famished Road, in which the party of the poor vies against the party of the rich. So all three, in reality, all three Nigerian parties, to greater or lesser degrees, they claim to be party of the disadvantaged, and to promote social and economic change. So, and these three parties again, they used politics for personal enrichments, personal benefits. Although they used the slogans, or they claim to be representing the one who had no power or who were at loss, instead they were working for their personal benefits. So, and like at the time when it was Nigeria gained self-rule, it was modeled on the British system. It had a prime minister at its head, bicameral legislator with a one house representing regions based on their population. So it also created that the division of power among the political parties. It also created problems because everyone was entirely focused on its betterment of its own, group or party. They were indulged in personal benefits instead of the whole. So there were elections in 1964, and Ben Okri has also depicted the election of 1964 in his work, and it was the time the politician, they campaigned only in the company of bodyguards. So, and electoral officials, they were terrorized by political thugs, so who invoke criminal methods to sway the vote. It happens, these days as well. So if you have power, you misuse your power. It is a common practice. So it was also at that time. So in 1966, because of all the imbalance, and there was the chaos, and everyone they attacked each other verbally and physically. So in 1966, the government took control. Military took control of the federal government, and the Nigeria's parliamentary democracy lasted for only 5 years. From 1966 to onwards, it was the military rule, and it lasted for almost 30 or 20 years, a rough idea. So from 1966 to 1991, when the Famished wrote published, it was published in 1991. So Nigeria, it experienced a bloody military rule, and there was only one civilian rule during all the period. It was from 1979 to 83, and after that the government the military took control. So it was quite through all the periods, Nigeria, it has seen quite tough time, as the period that was presented in the Famished Road is the military rule in Nigeria. So let's see events in the history at the time the novel was written. Military rule in Nigeria. So military took control in 1966, and was when it was group of 5 young army majors from the south, 4 Igbo and 1 Yoruba. So their coup was at first welcomed by the populace people. The rebels conducted it as a pan-Nigerian trans-ethnic project, whose purpose was fully articulated by its leader. So the period when the military took control, or military ruled over Nigeria, it was quite the tough one for the people. The people, they begin to say that there were many things happened. There was corruption and dirty politics. So the people begin to say that young army majors, they had deceived the Nigeria. So the Nigeria faced the worst period of the lifetime in that time. And when it was published, the novel published, military still ruled, because of all the dirty politics and the personal benefits, the bribes or corruption. There was a civil war. It was a civil war, and a series of bloody military coups. So Nigeria, and when it was written, Famished Road, he has presented that period, and it also shows that the ethnic factionalism, it had dragged the nation through civil war or the military rule. So it also depicted that Nigeria, it had yet to achieve unified nationhood. And the Abiku nation has yet to choose existence. So he is just trying to say, Abiku means the born to die. So he is just trying to say they just need to look for existence instead of going for personal. They need to look. They need to choose their survival. How they can survive. How they can make their existence. So these are all the things that he had presented in his work. To conclude, we can say he has presented the period when there was military rule, and in the after independence, the period he has represented in the Famished Road, and he also represented the concept of Abiku. Rather, the whole story revolves around it, and it was kind of it is a kind of magical realism he has presented in the Famished Road. I've also put references from where I have collected this data. You can get it from these by using these references. So for now it is all. That's all for now for this lecture. In the next lecture I'll be telling about the plot, overview of the Famished Road, the characters, and hopefully the title significance. Thank you so much for your patience and stay blessed.